Okay, welcome everybody to ICIE Symposium. Today's topic is the Naglieri General Ability Tests, International Implications. We are really honored to have Jack Naglieri, Dina Bruce, and Kimberly Lansdowne as our guests today. I will say a few words about each one of them. So Jack Naglieri, PhD, is a research professor at the University of Virginia and senior research scientist at the Devereux Center for Resilient Children. He started his career as a school psychologist in 1975, earned a PhD in 1979, and held university positions at Northern Arizona University, the Ohio State University, and George Mason University. Throughout these years, he focused on applied educational and psychological research and the development of psychological and educational measurement tools. He is the author of Naglieri Nonverbal Ability Test. He co-authored Helping All Gifted Children Learn and the Naglieri General Ability Tests, Verbal, Nonverbal, and Quantitative, as well as the Cognitive Assessment System, 2nd edition, Autism Spectrum Rating Scale, and Comprehensive Executive Function Inventory, Child and Adult. Our second speaker is Dina Bruce, PhD. She is a gifted education director at Paradise Valley, USD in Arizona, where she has developed a continuum of gifted programs, preschool through high school. She also coordinates the Gifted Master's Program at Arizona State University and serves on the NAGC Board of Directors as Governance Secretary and previously served as School District Representative. She received the 2020 and 2019 NAGC Book of the Year Award, the 2014 NAGC Gifted Coordinator Award, and NAGC's Professional Development Network Award in 2013. Dina co-authored the books, A Teacher's Guide to Flexible Grouping and Collaborative Learning, Designing Gifted Education Programs, the Cluster Grouping Handbook, Teaching Gifted Kids in Today's Classroom, Helping All Gifted Children Learn, and the Naglieri General Ability Tests, Verbal 2021. Dina assists schools in developing and supporting gifted programs with an emphasis on increasing diversity. Our third speaker is Kimberly Lansdowne, PhD, is the founding executive director of the Herberger Young Scholars Academy and Secondary School for Highly Gifted Students at Arizona State University. She has a lengthy career in teaching and administration at universities, colleges, public and private schools. At ASU 2014 to present, she develops and teaches undergraduate and graduate level education classes for Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. She typically teaches education courses on curriculum, instruction, testing, measurement, and special needs. At Scottsdale School District 2000 to 2010, Kimberly was the director of gifted services and served as a district level administration.
Overseeing
several programs. Okay, I'm sorry, it just disappeared for a second. Okay, so here with us today is also Professor Dr. Tassir Yamin.
Nine.
There's more. I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know why all of this skipped. Okay, let's start again. Along with being featured in multiple media events focusing on her work at the Herberger Academy, Kim has authored articles, books, and book chapters. She co-authored Helping All Children Learn and the Naglieri of General Ability Quantitative with co-authors Jack Naglieri and Dina Bruce. Are we there now?
Yes.
Yes, we are. Perfect. So with us is also Dr. Tassir Yamin. He's a General Director at International Center for Innovation and Education, and he will introduce today's symposium topic for us all. Thank you, and my apologies.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for this introduction. First of all, I would like to express my thankful and appreciation to my dear friend Jack and our friends and colleagues, the co-authors of the Naglieri General Ability Test. And this talk, I was waiting so long time because I would like to introduce these people who managed to make paradigm shift in gifted education in general and in identifying the gifted in particular. Today, you are going to hear a unique speech, and it will be about the Naglieri General Ability Tests, how they apply it as an innovative method for equitable identification of gifted students from diverse populations using verbal, quantitative, and nonverbal tests. The tests were explicitly developed to maximize fairness, and this is the most important, by using test questions that require minimal knowledge, don't require the use of a specific language, with verbal instructions that don't demand verbal comprehension, and don't require the students to orally articulate the answers. And these three parts, or the three main parts of online testing, can be used independently or jointly to measure general ability in 30 minutes each. So for today, also, we will know more about recent research using a large sample of students from kindergarten up to 12th grade. And they have around 8,000 students in that study. And they made the study in the United States and demonstrated that these tests measure general ability and do so with little difference across race, ethnicity, and parental educational levels. We propose, or they propose, the researchers, that because of these test questions can be solved using any language, that they hold much potential for identification of students with high general ability across countries, especially when using local norms. So as you see, and at the beginning of the meeting, I told Jack that we met face-to-face in 2009 in the World Council in Vancouver, Canada. And at that time, it was really amazing when he was talking about the current situation of identification in general and employing or conducting the old types of IQ tests. So I will make use of this opportunity again to thank our three speakers from the United States, and now Jack and Kimberly, the platform is yours. So I will stop sharing, and now you can have your screen.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. Every time I listen to our introduction, I am reminded, it's really similar to your story about going to the World Conference and meeting Jack Naglieri. I have a similar story that I'm going to share with you, just to give you the background of why the three of us are here. So I am speaking to you from Phoenix, Arizona. It is 9 a.m. here, and I love the fact that we can all be on wherever we are in the world listening to this. I love that aspect of what's happened with the pandemic. But what's hard about this is that I can't see all of you, and I'm such a people person. It's difficult. So I would generally start by asking who all of you are. Like, what do all of you do? So I am going to assume a few things, and I know we're not supposed to assume anything, but in this moment of having so many people that I can't interact with, I'm going to guess that every person that's listening right now has been in a situation where we are trying to find a way of identifying students that really need different types of programs, different pacing, higher level, different groupings. I think we've all been there. And I think we've all been in a spot where it has been difficult to identify certain groups of kids, no matter what we do. And so Dina and Jack and I came together. We each were working separately for many years. I don't even want to tell you how many I have been in gifted education. but each one of us were working very separately on this very large problem in gifted education of identifying students in underrepresented populations. Dina and I had the pleasure of traveling across the United States in the early 2000s. And we too went in to listen to Jack Naglieri speak about the work that he had been doing. Dina and I went in, I will say this now in full disclosure, that we were a bit skeptical. We were people that were running very large school districts. We had thousands and thousands of kids that we were testing every year. And we went in to listen to Jack Naglieri speak, and that started this very, very long relationship that gets us here to the Naglieri General Ability Test. So long introduction. I just want to say thank you for having us this morning. And Jack, I'm going to turn that over to you.
Thanks, Kim. I feel very honored by your and everyone's comments, so thank you for that. So what we're going to do today, first I would like to just say that Dina sends her regards. She couldn't be here today because she's speaking at a different conference, coincidentally at exactly the same time. But I wanted to begin by clarifying and contextualizing what we've done and why. And just to begin, just to be clear, we're talking about gifted students, and we define that as very smart individuals and talented being very accomplished. So we're going to make this distinction throughout the session today. And the other part of the big picture for today is that the tools that we've used for screening, like a COGAT or a WISC, and those kinds of tools, I think in a lot of ways are a very big obstacle to finding all the gifted children. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how we can change what we've done so that we can find the kids that we've left behind. My journey actually began in Arizona way before I met Dina and Kim, when I started working as a professor at Northern Arizona University. And I obviously needed to learn about Native American Navajo children and how they were tested. And I got a firsthand look at this problem when I actually went to a Supai village, which is in the Grand Canyon. On the way, we went by these waterfalls, which the Supai village is noted for. But when I actually tested students doing what I was always taught to do, give a WISC, this is in 1981, I realized that the test was really inadequate. And when I wrote this report many years ago, I made it clear that the performance score, which is about average, was a reasonable measure of her ability, but the verbal score, as I wrote, cannot be considered an estimate of intelligence because the child hardly speaks mostly Supai and very little English. I had heard from my psychology colleagues in the Department of Psychology at the university talk about using the WISC with these individuals and never questioning the validity of the verbal scale. And that really irritated me, honestly. So in 1982, I published my first paper on equity in assessment, and it was titled, "Does the WISC measure verbal intelligence for non-English speaking children?" The answer is no. And my second paper was also on Navajo children, dealing with this very issue. So I've been doing this for a long time, and when I first started to develop my own tests, the first test I published was called Matrix Analogies Test, published in 1985. And my goal was to evaluate general ability for all students fairly. And I wrote back then that this kind of approach would allow us to find gifted children from disadvantaged or different backgrounds. Now, these two tests, the group, the individual version, were my first step into the nonverbal world. And I was very thrilled when I found very little gender differences, very little race differences, and strong correlations to achievement. In other words, these data showed me this approach had validity. Some years later, the matrix analogies test was transformed to what became the Naglieri Nonverbal Ability Test. And again, looking at the research from that, I published several studies with tens of thousands of students to show that the nonverbal approach was strongly correlated with achievement, as strong as a whisk correlates with achievement, by the way, and that we got small differences by race and ethnicity. And with Donna Ford, I showed similar identification rates using the nonverbal approach. I published shortly after that an individual version, and again, got excellent validity, good reliability, small differences by race and ethnicity and ELL status, strong correlations with other similar tests like Raven's matrices, the Tony, and the WISC-4 matrix reasoning. Then in that too, again, another set of data, hundreds of thousands of kids here, strong correlation with the Otis Lennon, strong correlations with reading and math, small differences by race and ethnicity, strong correlations with the Wexler nonverbal scale. Then NNAT3, the most recent of the NNAT versions, no differences between paper and pencil or online, strong correlations with OLSAT. But the question that people kept asking me was, what about verbal and what about quantitative tests of general ability? Couldn't those be made that would complement the nonverbal? And this is where Dina and Kim came in, because we wrote this book, Helping All Gifted Children Learn. And when I thought about who would I want to work with to help me create a verbal test and a quantitative test, my very first choice was Kim and Dina. Kim and Dina's vast knowledge of the gifted field, Kim especially with her work in mathematics and quantitative, and Dina being Hispanic and bilingual, perfect for the verbal test. So this is the progression that led us to this talk today. And I'll tell you some more about it, a little bit more in detail next.
So,
by the way, we have our email, and we're always happy to hear from you in the future. So what did we do?
Hey, Jack, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's Kim.
Yeah.
I just wanted you to know that Donna Ford is on the call today, and I know that you're not looking at the chat, so I just wanted to give you a little shout out to Donna.
Thank you, Donna, for being here. I already mentioned to you that Donna and I did the study looking at hit rates. And that was one of the first studies I ever did. And I was so very pleased that Donna was actually in the same College of Education at Ohio State as I was at the time. And all I needed to do was walk down the hall and go to her office. And I still remember that first day that we met. And it was very clear that something great was going to come out of that. And it's been really wonderful having such a terrific, knowledgeable co-author as Donna over all these years. So appreciate that she's on the call here today. So what did we do with these general ability tests? We explicitly developed them for equitable identification of students from diverse cultural, linguistic, and socioeconomic backgrounds. That was our goal. It was unambiguous. And we use the traditional verbal, nonverbal, quantitative formats, but we do not use the traditional verbal and quantitative methodology. And by that, what I mean is that the test questions that we have on the verbal and the quantitative are not about academic knowledge. You'll see them. I'll show you what they look like. So we've vastly reduced the academic knowledge, but you can still measure verbal using verbal tests and quantitative tests because our test questions can be solved using any language. And we communicate to the students about what they need to do, not by lengthy verbal instructions, but by animated instructions. So, and I'll show you what that looks like as well. And we use a multiple choice format, so there's no need for verbal expression. And online administration for groups, as well as individual assessment, of course, is very powerful. At some point, we will have paper. So we'll start and we'll go through each of the 3 tests and show you what they look like. So the verbal test measures general ability. And this is very important. The verbal test measures general ability using pictures of objects. And this is actually modeled after a concept called the superfluous fourth that was described by A.R. Luria in his book, Language and Cognition. And I've always been interested in this particular methodology, and so glad that we could use it here. So what the student's task is to look at these 6 pictures and figure out what 5 of these pictures represent the same concept to identify which picture is different. So for example, the numbers 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are empty, and number 2 is full. So that concept drives this particular example. It's simple, but it's also gets quite difficult. Of course, that's what you need. Here's what the directions look like. So the child plays the video, the thought bubble comes up, the 5 images move together with an emphasis to show the one that doesn't belong, and then it zooms in and you can see the avatar now. Select this one and then that one. That's to show how to change your answer and then move to the next item. So kids get it. It's really pretty amazing to watch them do this. Now, the nonverbal test is like my previous nonverbal tests, except that I've created a number of different ways of making a matrix item. I did this very, very intentionally because I wanted to be able to introduce more diversity in the kinds of questions that we have. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, I just love making matrices items. But this measures general ability using questions that require the student to recognize the relationships among shapes. The verbal test was about relationships among verbal pictures that represent different verbal concepts. This is about relationships among shapes. And the animated instruction, again, the same kind of thing. Zoom out, thought bubble, where should I look first? At the top. What should I do next? Look at the options. There's the answer, choose the answer, and go from there. All right. Kim, would you talk a little bit about quant, please?
Sure. A couple things before I get to that, though. I do want to just point out that this has been I know, Jack, you've used the word fun. I know Dina uses the word fun, but it's fun when we are doing these with students. The process that we have started well over 5 years ago, right, Jack? To
Yes.
get to this point was really tedious and really hard to come up with questions and then to share them with our students. And one of the beautiful things about my job is I am around 120 really bright kids every single day. And so it was very, very fun to come up with these different types of reasoning problems and having the kids think it out loud while we were coming up with these. It was just so, it was a fantastic experience with kids. The Naglieri quantitative measures, again, general ability. And we talk a lot about math being a universal language. And so once again, I would love to be standing in front of all of you right now and like show of hands, how many people have stood in front of a group of 30 students and started an ability test and said, okay, go, after reading lengthy directions. And you can watch the kids that are not following along because the directions are so long and they're so hard. So it was very important for us to have this be simple math. So there's simple quantities. There's different types of critical and mathematical thinking that go along into it. But what's important is that the calculations are very simple. And again, the directions are really simple. So there's no verbal requirements and like math word problems in this. And so here's an example of one of the quantitative questions, 6, 7, 8, 9, what goes next? So it's very simple. It's just reasoning, it's patterning. So if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, and the directions again, I love this, that it is animated. The student just sits at the computer, watches this is a balance, right? It's an algebraic concept. So the 2 triangles equal 2 circles. So what would 1 triangle be equivalent to? And so you look at the answer keys and the distractors, and she chooses the correct answer. That's it. Those are the directions for all 3 of the different types of reasoning and the different types of abilities. Super easy and very, again, very fun for the kids to do this type of a problem. So we're at a place where we can stop. Jack, I do have one question in the chat.
Okay.
I'll read it to you. It says, what is the cognitive flexibility scale for children 9 through 12 years old? And what is the normal degree of cognitive flexibility?
Is that, I have no idea what test that is, cognitive flexibility measure?
Yeah, I was struggling with the question too. So let me read it to you one more time. What is the cognitive flexibility scale for children? What is the normal degree of cognitive flexibility?
Yeah, I don't know anything about that.
Maybe you could whoever wrote that, if you
You
could
know, Jack, I think we will leave the questions until the end because we would like to keep the flow of the talk until, you finish the session.
Okay, we can do
Yes.
that. Then I'll move forward.
Yeah, Kimberly, we can keep, the questions, whether in the chat room or, direct until we finish, the presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So here's an interesting thing to think about. Even though the tests have different content, they all measure general ability. And there's a lot of confusion about this. People used to say to me, well, your nonverbal test measures nonverbal intelligence. And I would say, no, nonverbal is a description of the content of the questions. It's not a description of a type of intelligence. And if you go back and read Wexler, for example, Wexler believed that verbal and the nonverbal or performance scales represented different ways to access general ability, but he never believed in nonverbal and verbal intelligences. We have said that. Many people have called it that because it kind of made sense, but it happens not to be the case. And if you think about Wexler's definition, aggregate the global capacity of the individual to act purposefully think rationally and deal effectively with his environment, there's no mention of verbal and nonverbal intelligences. This is very, very important. If you go back and read Rudolf Pintner, he describes the concept of general intelligence this way. We did not start with a clear definition of general intelligence, but borrowed from everyday life a vague term implying all-around ability, and we are still attempting to define it more sharply and endow it with a stricter scientific connotation. 1923. I have a special affinity to Rudolf Pintner because he did a lot of work in nonverbal tests, but also he was a professor of education at Ohio State University and was in Arps Hall, the same building that Donna Ford and I have been in for a long time. And I love his statement here from page 61 in his book that I have on my desk. A good intelligence test must avoid as much as possible anything that is commonly learned by the subjects tested. In a broad sense, this rests upon the differentiation between knowledge and intelligence. So we need to keep these, ideas in mind. In the book that Kim and Dina and I wrote, we describe general ability as something that allows us to solve many different kind of problems. They may have different content and different requirements, but they're all measuring general ability. Now, there is a lot of good research that supports the concept of G or general ability. Recent research by some of my friends and colleagues. And these researchers have said the total score on many of the traditional tests are the only score that you should measure. That's how much strength there is in the concept of G. But let's look to identify gifted children. Uh-oh, Zoom quit unexpectedly.
No, you're still on.
Okay. So this is from a recent survey. The COGAT and quantitative, the WISC, and the Woodcock Johnson.
Unmute yourself.
Okay, I think Kimberly, you can carry on. I think Jack is still there.
I'm here.
There he is.
Yes.
Okay. So now you see the National Survey of Gifted Education, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So COGAT and the WISC are the dominant ways in which we identify gifted children in the United States. And these tests have a lot of knowledge. They require lots of knowledge, whether it's the Stanford-Binet, the WISC-5, the Woodcock, even the KBC, subtest after subtest after subtest demands knowledge. This is an obstacle to fair and equitable assessment. Perhaps the best example is Woodcocks Test, where in his measure of intelligence or cognitive, he has a question like this: tell me another word for big, correct answer being large, gigantic, and huge. But on his achievement test, he has a question, tell me another word for large, big, enormous, gigantic, and huge. This isn't right. And I don't say this lightly, but this doesn't make any sense. If you are saying that you want to measure intelligence, like Rudolf Pintner said 100 years ago, a good intelligence test must avoid anything commonly learned. And the result is this result that we have here. And that is that when you look at Otis Lennon, the Stanford-Binet, the COGAT, and so on, they yield huge differences by race and ethnicity, but in that very small differences, because we measure thinking in a way that's not confounded by knowing. Now, some people will say to you, well, but these tests, like the WISC and such, they don't have evidence of psychometric bias. Well, I don't dispute that, but that's only half of the story. The other half of the story, according to the standards for educational psychological tests, is that a test can be considered unfair if it penalizes students for not having learned the content. And that is detected by looking at mean score differences like I just showed you. And even if a test does not demonstrate psychometric bias, it still can be considered unfair. And we can do better. I'm going to show you. If you measure thinking separately from knowing, you will get equity. So the easiest way to detect if you have a test question that is not going to be equitable is just ask yourself the question: what does the student have to know to complete the task? How does the student have to think? And those two questions will make it clear what kind of a test you have. Now, as far as our 3 tests, we do now have 3 research studies that have been conducted on 3 separate samples with the 3 tests: the verbal, the nonverbal, and the quantitative. This study was conducted by the publisher in a very, very careful way. And as you can see, we had between 2,500 to 3,600 students in each sample. They varied from kindergarten to 12th grade. We got no gender differences on any of the 3 tests, no race and ethnic differences on any of the 3 tests, and I think perhaps most importantly, no differences across parental education level. So the importance of this study is that it's 3 studies. So we have replication. We're replicating the concept of measuring general ability using solely nonverbal content, verbal content that can be solved in any language, and quantitative content that requires minimal knowledge. This is very, very powerful evidence that these tests actually work very well. In addition, we have also found very high reliability coefficients for the 3 tests. We've done confirmatory factor analyses of the tests, supported the broad factor of general ability. We find the nonverbal test correlates strongly with my NNAT3. Gifted students score considerably higher than on the 3 tests than typical children. Then even when you look at the item level with sophisticated differential item functioning analyses, tiny differences were found for items. And so overall, these initial findings clearly suggest that these tests meet the guidelines for reliability, validity, and fairness. So where we are right now with these tests, they're currently being used in selected districts around the country here in the US, and will become available over the next coming months. At this time, we're doing online administration. We will have paper versions in the future. And because it's 3 separate tests, people have the option. You could use any combination of the 3. When the children are completed the test, all the scores are automatically converted to derived scores using local norms. That's the approach that we're using at this particular time. And I think we can, actually, the publisher, it's Multi-Health Systems. It's a new publisher for me. I had published with them already with my autism spectrum rating scale and my comprehensive executive function inventory. I think this is the best publisher I've ever worked with. They are so meticulous and so careful and so thorough. And I think that shows up in the quality of the instrument that we've created. So we certainly can devise verbal and quantitative tests that can be solved regardless of the language that a student speaks. And we can use nonverbal directions, take out verbal expression, and really achieve equity. Of course, that's what our goal has been. And you can go to this site, Naglieri Gifted Tests, for a lot more information. I think I'm going to stop there right now so we can take questions down here.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thank you so much. Okay, so I think generally we either ask people to write in the chat or use the raise hand function in case they would like to ask something. So I would encourage our participants, if you have any questions, to please raise your hand. Oh, we have a question from Jyoti. Go ahead, Jyoti.
You can, okay, I will allow you to unmute. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Tasir, Naina, and Dr. Jack for a very interesting presentation. I'm from India. I'm Professor Jyoti from India, working in gifted education and creativity, and a big fan of your work, your previous work. So this sounds very interesting. There are 2-3 questions. In fact, these are queries, and probably you must have answer to these. The one is because when we talk about creativity, gifted creativity is an important component. So does there any factor or component of your testing which talks about creativity? This one. Continuing to this is what are the parameters? Because, for example, in India, students, there is students do a lot of practice, you know, so they have exposure to these kind of non-verbal expertise and worksheets and etc. So so they have enough experience and practice of doing these non-verbal tasks. So how do we eliminate this? Is there any, so the norms are defined age-wise, time-wise. So is time is also a factor in how much time schedule the child is doing this? For example, gifted students doing it in much lesser time than in a normal child, because India being a highly diverse country, and there is a lot of variation in terms of educational opportunities and a big segment from disadvantaged section. So if these parameters are answered, probably this can be a very useful test for Indian population.
Yes, thank you for all those questions. It's a pleasure to hear you. So we will be producing a creativity rating scale in the next year or two, but these tests are not designed to measure creativity. As far as exposure is concerned, the thing about a matrix test is that as the complexity increases, you may know what you need to do, but doing it can be above your ability level. So, for example, I have worked with many children. Well, I'll back up for a second. I have an assistant. My assistant has a daughter, a 9-year-old daughter. That daughter has been exposed to so many of my test questions that she can't solve a really hard one just because she was exposed to it. Because when you have a 4 or 5 dimensional matrix, it's not about knowing what to do, it's about being able to actually do it. So there's no evidence that prepping or exposure changes the ability of the student to solve the problem. It may change their comfort level, but it doesn't really change their performance. As far as age scores, yes, we always need to control for age because there is always a progression of number correct and age. And we do time the students, and we're looking at different ways of using the time score. And that's something that you can look forward to in the future, because we're actually timing every item
Okay.
as well as the total. So I'm really interested in, like, for example, looking at the time for the easiest items to get like a processing speed score, and those kinds of things. But we'll look at that as we go forward. So,
Okay. Thank you so much, and all the best. Very interesting.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that question and the answer. We have another question in the chat. I think you touched on a little bit about this, but maybe there could be some more information. And the question is, what is the difference between this test and Torrance test?
And Torrance test?
Yes.
Measures completely different things. Yeah. So we're measuring general ability. That's our goal. That's what we do. And Torrance test, of course, gets at creativity.
So Jack, can you please give us a brief description or brief idea about what is unique about Naglieri General Ability Test?
Sure.
In addition, of course, you know, in addition to that, it is available online, and the norms are very dynamic because, you know, you are employing the technology in order to generate norms, you know, every now and then. So you can please summarize what is unique about this test.
Kim, do you want to answer that?
No, you.
I think you have, Jack, but you've got a slide that's back a little bit. You go ahead.
Yeah, so
We are watching you. So if you read to a point, she will add.
sure. So we have taken a traditional conceptualization of general ability with verbal content, nonverbal content, and quantitative content. And I think we could say we've purified it because we allow a person to think with language, but any language. Think with simple math concepts, but not with complex math. So we measure in a pure way, not a way that's so confounded. Like Kim was mentioned earlier about lengthy verbal instructions. Well, I know that some people think, well, you have to have verbal instructions to make sure that the child understands the task. I would say if the task is so darn hard to understand, you should have written a better task. You know, it shouldn't be that hard to understand. It should be easy to understand and test how well the student can think, not what they can figure out what they have to do or not. So I think that's really the essence of what we've done. We've really said we can do better, and that better is going to find so many children. Just to give you an example, in the United States, I've estimated right now in grades K to 12, there's approximately 850,000 Black, Hispanic, Native American kids who are learning English, who are smart enough to be identified for gifted programs, but weren't because the COGAT score wasn't high enough. Their achievement scores weren't high enough in reading and math, but they're really, really smart. There are a lot of people out there like that. And it's those people that we want to find. And we can do it with these tests. I've already shown with my research, and especially the research that Donna Ford and I have done, I've already shown that you can do it with a nonverbal test. And now you can do it with these 3 tests. And 3 separate tests, so you get 3 separate indicators of how smart a person is. And you can do it in a way that doesn't matter what language they speak, even if they only speak English. You can have a child who comes from an impoverished background and they don't speak English very well. And if you give them a whisk, they don't look that smart. But it's just because they have an opportunity to learn. It's really not complicated. And the thing that really amazes me is when I can, look at these old books from 1923, and these people who started all this knew this problem. Why did we ignore it for so long? Why do we still give a whisk and a Stanford Binet and a Kogat and an Olsat? All those tests came from the work of the Yoakum and Yerkes and Thorndike and all the guys more than 100 years ago. Why do we accept a vocabulary test as a measure of intelligence? Why do we accept an arithmetic word problem as a measure of intelligence? It doesn't make sense if you want to be able to measure children fairly and equitably. I think that's really the essence of what's unique about what we've done here.
Thank you so much, Jack. So my next question will be for Kimberly. What you recommend for people and nations who are, just started gifted education, and they are entrusted, for example, to employ what we call multiple criteria screening and identification process. So, as you know, they are used, as Jack just showed us this book. They are used to the old, terminology. They are used to the old tools. So I would like, because we have audience from different countries, from different parts of the world, and we would like to listen to you as a scholar, telling us what should be done, to make this process more effective and efficient in order to identify the gifted in the right way.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate a few things that Jack said. I think overall change is very difficult. Change is hard, and you have to take risks in order to make change happen. We know that, we've seen that over the past 2 years. I think that we have really complicated this process. In the field of gifted education, I would like there to be more collaboration and less competition. I would like us to work together to solve these problems and really recognize that we have been working on this problem for 25, 30 more years. And again, I just want to keep it simple. What is the best way that you can start? So I work with a lot of school districts around the country. And one of the things that I say that is so simple to identify, so simple, is your math reasoning kids. Those kids that are thinking quantitatively so vastly different than the norm in your class. So start with that. Just start simple with that. Math is so easy it's linear. It's a universal language. We all study it. If you could just start there, start with just that student that you're identifying as this kid that is reasoning well beyond the peer group in mathematical reasoning, and think about how we can accelerate that child. Keep it simple, start small, try something different. Have this be a pilot program. Go to your whoever the head of your school is and say, we want to try this. We can keep the old testing too, but could we do a pilot study next year that looks at this different way of finding kids that we have not found before? There are invisible gifted. We have not found these kids. So now's the time. Now's the time to do it. Keep it simple, start small. So that would be my suggestion for every single teacher of the gifted, parent that I talk to, administrator. Just try something, start somewhere. Get out of that pattern that you've been doing for years and years and years. So Jack, there's in the chat that I love this. I took a screenshot because I'm going to send it off to MHS. This says one of the last comments is, does it mean the test measures how a student thinks and not what they know? And I'm like, yes, that's it, right? That's it, right, Jack? That's like so perfect. I love that. So, and Jack, there's one more question that's in the, I don't know if it's a question, let me read it. Follow up on the Naglieri General Ability towards creativity. Do you anticipate subtest scores for the Naglieri results and or the Torrance test of creativity that might inform the other? For example, general ability impacting creativity or creativity impacting general ability?
That's a good question.
I think this question from Connie Phillips.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. We'll have some information to answer that question in the next couple of years because we will look at that. So,
and then the last question that's on here, Jack, and Debbie is on from MHS, by the way, Jack. The youngest age of the students the test is suitable for, I know we've talked about it being kindergarten, but is it 5 years of age? Is that what we settled on?
Certainly 5. I think for the nonverbal we go down to 4, but I'm not positive.
Oh, Angelina, thank you, Angelina. She says 4. Angelina's on 2. I didn't see you.
Okay.
So
good.
4 years, and up to what age, Angelina? 18.
Around 18.
Thank you.
Great.
So those are our MHS people. Look how efficient and wonderful they are. Thank you.
And knowledge. Yeah, great. So I just like to close with one. Tazir, can I have another 20 seconds?
Yeah, you have all the time.
Okay.
Yes.
Are there any other questions? Because I noticed that we're a little bit after the hour.
There is one hand. Maybe we can allow that to be a last question if you have time, or we can just close depending on your availability.
Hey, Jack, it's Kim, and I do have a 10 o'clock meeting, so I'm going to sign off, everybody. Thank you. I'll leave you now.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for joining us this session. We are highly appreciating all your contributions, and we are very optimistic about this test, and we hope it will be available in all identification processes around the world.
Thank you, Tazir.
So now, Jack, it is yours.
I just want to end with a quote from Martin Luther King in his memorial. I live near Washington, D.C., and I love this statement: make a career of humanity. Commit yourself to the noble struggle for equal rights. You will make a greater person of yourself, a greater nation of your country, and a finer world to live in. And with that, I'm going to say thank you all very much for attending today. You can always be in touch with me via email. I'm always happy to hear from you and interact. Tazir, thank you. Nana, thank you so very much for making this possible. And for everyone, I'll say thank you and bye for now.
Thank you so much, Jack. And we will also let people know about your website and the connection to the website, because there is a lot of information available over there, in addition to instructions how to get the test and other tools. So thanks again, my dear friend Jack, and we wish you all the best, and looking forward to seeing you soon.
Yes.
With my best wishes. Thank you.
Thank you as well.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
So now I think